This video is going to be all about state. Now, if there is one video in this entire course that you watch 2 or 3 times over to absolutely nail the concept, it's going to be this one, because state is such a fundamental concept. Now, what is state? State is essentially just an object that lives inside of a component that stores all of the data that that component and maybe some of its children need. So I'll say that again. State is just an object that holds data that itself needs as well as some children may need. And you can think of state as what's called a single source of truth, meaning that I don't like sometimes you come at this from if you're coming at it from a jQuery background or a vanilla JavaScript background, and if you want to have data, sometimes that data lives in multiple places, meaning that you might have it in a variable, but then you might also put some data in like a data attribute on a DOM element, and you might pull it out of there and put it back in and use that as a place to store your data. With React, again, the golden rule is don't touch the DOM, and what we want to think about it is instead of thinking about updating all of the pieces on our website, we want to think about just updating our data and letting React take it. So let me show you an example here. Here's the finished one that we're building, and I have my app component selected here. Remember, the app component is the parent component to the menu, the header, the order, and the inventory. And you'll see inside of state, I have a list of all of the fish that we're going to be selling. And here is fish 1, and there is a price of fish 1, which is $17.24. Now, where is that being used? Well, it's obviously being displayed here. It's being displayed here, and it's also being displayed here, as well as it's being added up into the total. And if I were to add another one, it's being multiplied by 2 and then added to 32 for the total. Now, if this was a regular JavaScript app and I clicked add to order, there's a couple places where I would need to update that. I would need to update the price right here as well as the total. Now, if I were to change the value of how much a piece of halibut costs, I need to update it here. I need to update it there. I need to update it here, and I need to update it here. And that is a nightmare trying to maintain wherever those variables were used. With React, you simply just keep your data in state. And whenever state changes, let me show you. I'm going to change this to 2724 and I hit enter. What just happened there is I updated my state, which is where the data lives, and React, you ready for it? Reacted to that change, and it knows where I've used that variable price anywhere in the application, and it will then go and forward and update all of the different pieces on the website. And that therein is some of the most powerful pieces of React, where you don't have to care about where on the page you used it. As long as you used it as a variable somewhere on the page and you change your data, React will know where exactly on the page it needs to update the values on there. So what we're going to be creating in this video is the add fish form. This is the form that we have at the bottom here. We have a name, a price, whether it's fresh or sold out, a description, an image, and then we have a button that will submit it. So let's go ahead and make that little component first. So back to our editor here, open up our inventory.js, and let's put these on its own line now. This needs to be in an H2 tag. And you see how prettier just put some parentheses around there? Let me show you that again. Bring it back to where I had it. So I put an H2 tag with the inventory. It knows that it's now multiple lines. When I save it, it's going to put these parentheses around it for me, which is very nice. Now, you think like, okay, that's good. I need to add fish form. Why don't I just give myself a form tag here and start going nuts? But yeah, the add fish form is in the inventory component now, but the idea behind React is that you're not building pages or pieces, you're actually building components. And I want to be able to use this add fish form anywhere. I could put it in a pop-up. Maybe I wanted to put it in an administrative panel. Maybe I wanted to put it underneath the order for whatever reason. I should be able to put this add fish form anywhere that I want on the page. So I'm not going to directly tie it to inventory. We're going to create our own component for it. So let's go into our components folder, make a new file called addFishForm.js. And in here, we're just going to make our component that we did. I'm just going to copy paste the inventory one and just change the instances of inventory to add fish form. Good. And then from the return, we're going to return a form tag, which let's just put a paragraph tag and say it works. Now I'll go back into my inventory and we'll import the add fish form component from our add fish form.js file. And then we'll go ahead and use it right underneath here. So add. Good. What's going on here? It's underlining it. Import can only be used in a .ts file. Oh, what did I, from, there we go. Now it's everything is working for me. Go back to our application and you see it works. We should be able to open up our dev tools as well and search for the add fish form. And you see that that component is now being rendered out inside of it. Good. So let's go back to our add fish form here. Now we need a couple of different inputs and buttons for all of the different values that we need. Let's take a look. We need the name, price, the availability. We need the description, an image, and then a button. So what I like to do with this kind of thing is just paste in a list of the things that I need, indent them all, put a cursor on every single line, and we'll say input name equals whatever the name that we had there, type equals text, and we'll close that input, and then placeholder. Placeholder is equal to that, and we'll capital. No, we don't have the ability to capitalize. Transform to uppercase. Beautiful. And then we'll close that input we have there. Good. So what does that give us? All these different inputs. We want to give that form a class of fish. We want to give this form a class name of fish edit. And we want to give ourselves a button with the type of submit. Inside of that, we'll say add fish. Looking pretty good. We've got some goofiness going on there. Close that. And the description is going to be not an input, but a text area. Looking good. And then the status is going to be a drop down. So we'll make that a select with a closing select tag. I guess it doesn't need a placeholder or a type. Same with the text area, doesn't need a type either. And then we need an option tag for the value is available. We'll say fresh, and we need a option with the value of unavailable, and we'll call that sold out. Good. So name, price, fresh, description, and then a URL to an image, and we've got a button that is going to submit it. Good. Now what we want to do is whenever somebody submits this form, we need to then turn all of these inputs into an actual fish object that has all the values and properties on it. So what we'll do is we'll take our form here. We'll say on submit, just like we did with the store picker. And I'll say this.createFish. And go up here. We'll make a create fish. Remember, you have to do the funky syntax here. We'll pass the event because we want to stop the form from submitting. I'll call it event just to keep it consistent with the other one. And we'll call first thing, stop the form from submitting with e.preventDefault. And let's just console log making a fish. Oh no, because it's event.preventDefault. It's whatever you pass it in as here. I usually use E myself, but since I used event on the store picker, I'll keep it consistent. So I'm going to type into here, add fish, And now we have making a fish show up in the console. Next up, we need to pull all the values out of these different inputs. And like we did with the store picker, there's two ways that we could sort of pull the values out. And the first one is refs. So we could just give a ref to every single one. And that's actually what we're going to do. And then the second one is what we're going to be running into when we hit this. And we're going to listen for a key up event and mirror that data to state. So let's go ahead and create a bunch of refs. So we got name, price, status, description, and image. And I'll just use my cursors here to say ref is equal to this dot, I'll paste in the value ref. We'll call them name ref, price ref, status ref, description ref, and image ref. And then I'll copy all of those and go up here. And we'll make a whole bunch of refs at once with my multiple cursors. React.create ref. Now, what we should be able to do in here, and let's just do it with a name for now, but if we console.log this.nameref.value.value. So if I go into here, I type in Wes, I click add fish, we should see the Wes value in there. So let's go ahead and make our fish. Let's say const fish is equal to, and it's going to need all of those values that we have. So it pastes them all in here again. This multiple cursors is really handy for this type of thing where you have to type essentially the same thing over and over again. So I'll copy it. It's equal to this .nameref.value.value. And then is that going to work? Let's see. Let's just console log that entire fish object now. Let's see if we have created a fish. So Wes, price is $4.99. Add a fish. And then you see we console log an object where the price, the name, the image. The one thing is that we want the price to be stored as not as a string, but we want the price to be stored as a number. So what we can do here is we can wrap that in a parse float. I always like to use floats as for my numbers instead of integers when I'm dealing with money. And that is because I like to store my everything in cents. So instead of like $10.54, I just store it as 1,054 cents. And then you never have to deal with the weird issues that integers, which is decimals, bring about. So let's see if that fixes that for us. There we go. And you see that the price is now blue. Status, you could also flip that to a Boolean rather than just being available, unavailable. That could be true or false, but I'm going to keep it as a string here. So now is the question that we have this fish, and the fish now needs to get into state. So there's a couple questions that arise as to how do we get it into state? And second, where does state live? Because every component in React can have its own state. However, it is often the case where you have sort of one parent state on a higher component, and then you pass that state down to the children. Because right now, this data of this fish is limited to this add fish form component. And if I wanted to give it to inventory, I wanted to give it to the order, and I wanted to give it to the menu, there's no way to share that data with these other components unless that data lives at a higher level. And that's exactly why we have this app component. Let's look at app, and you open up app, and app has header and going to have our menu and going to have order and inventory. It's going to have all these components inside of it because the data is going to live in app, and we can always pass the data into header, pass the data into order and into inventory. You can't pass data up, but you can always pass the data down. So what we need to do is we need to go into our app component here, and we need to start creating state. The first thing we need to do when creating state is you sort of need to set the empty state, or what we call the initial state. What does state look like when the component initially mounts before we've had a chance to add items to our state? Because it is often the case where you load a component first time with an empty state, and then you do maybe an AJAX request, or in our case, we're going to manually be entering them, and then they need to be pushed into state, and state will then update. So let's go up here. So initial state can either be set in the constructor like we did before. You do something like this, super, and they say this.state equals, and you add the state there. Or we can use a property, which is my preferred way to do it. So we'll say state is equal to an empty object. Now, inside of state, we describe the two different pieces of state that we will be using for this application. First is fishes, and that will be an empty object. And second is an order, which is also going to be an empty object. So fishes is going to be an object full of many fishes. And we could also use an array there. If you're having a list of fishes, you could use an empty array. If you're doing a number, you could set it to 0 or null. If you're using a string, you could set it to an empty string. It's best to keep it whatever the shape it will be when it does get set at a later point in time. So we're going to keep that as an empty object. And by the way, don't email me about fishes. It is fishes. I know that the plural of fish is fish, but I looked it up, and I am a fish scientist. And if you have multiple of a species, so if you have a trout and a bass and a halibut, because they are multiple species, they are fishes. So don't email me. People actually do. So we have our empty state here of fishes, and that's going to look a little bit something like this. We're going to have like fish 1 and fish 2 and fish 3 and so on. I'll talk a little bit more about that naming convention in just a second. Good. And then the other question is like, how do we get an item into state? And what you have to do is you can't actually update it directly from this add fish form, because the methods that update state and the actual state always need to live in the exact same component. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a secondary method here. It's going to call add fish, and that is going to be a method that takes in a fish, and we're using the syntax here because we're going to need to access this inside of it. And then let's just console log adding a fish. So let's give that a save. And now the question is, how do I actually call this method, right? Like, this is kind of weird area where we have our method here, but we want to call it 2 levels deeper, because let's look at app right now. App, so the method lives in app, but we actually want to run it from add fish form. So the question is, how do you get a function that lives in app down to a lower level, which is add fish form? And the answer is, how does anything get into a component? It's props. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass it to inventory, and then inventory is going to then in turn pass it over to our add fish form. So the inventory will pass down the add fish equals this dot add fish. So I always like to keep the name of the function the same, so that when we go into our secondary one, we'll be able to see it. Good. And then let's go into our inventory, and where is it available? Well, let's take a look. Let's look at our inventory, and now you see that we have one prop, which is a add fish function. So now it's been surfaced from app to inventory, and we'll pass it down one more level. Add fish is equal to, oops. And now it's not this dot add fish, it's this dot props dot add fish, because it doesn't live on inventory. It's just been passed in via props. So give that a save. And now when we look at our add fish form, we have access to this function, which really does live 2 levels higher. So go into our add fish, and what we can do is we'll get rid of this console log, and we'll say this dot props dot add fish, and we'll pass it our fish. So if all goes according to plan, we should have been able to call this add fish, which lives in our main app component, and we should see console log adding a fish. So let's see. Go to our console. There we go. Every time I click it, it says adding a fish. Good. So now the question is, how do we get it into our state? If it was an array, you might think like it's this dot state dot fishes dot push, and maybe you push the fish in, and you call it a day. And however, even if it was an array, that's not how we do it. And then if it's an object, you might think like, okay, like this dot state dot fishes dot fish1 is equal to fish, and you call it a day, because that's how you update objects in JavaScript, right? However, this is kind of a weird thing that I got a bit hung up on in React. In order to update state, you need to use their existing setState API. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So this is sort of two steps that you need to always update a piece of state. The first thing you need to do is take a copy of the existing state. So the reason why we take a copy is because you never want to reach into state and actually modify it directly. That's what's called a mutation in JavaScript. And a mutation is when you reach directly into an object. And that can cause issues with performance. That can cause issues with things updating out of order. So what we want to do is first take a copy of the existing state. So we'll say const fishes is equal to an object. And then how do you take a copy of an object in JavaScript? Well, we can say ... this.state.fishes. And what that will do is it will take a copy of everything that is in state. This is what's called an object spread, and it's a nice clean way to take a copy of it. If you are familiar with what a deep clone is, I can tell you right now it's not necessary to do a deep clone. We just do it at a top level. Then what we want to do is add our new fish to that fishes. So add our new fish to that fishes variable. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is, here, let me show you the finished copy here. What we're going to be doing is we're using keys that are incremental. So fish1, fish2, fish3, all the way through to fish9. Those are just the defaults when I load them in. And then everything after that, I'm just going to use what's called a timestamp to give it a unique key for each one. It's just a little bit simpler than having to deal with an array right now. So we'll say fishes, and we will set, instead of setting the fish1 or fish2, we will set something called, use backticks there, fish date.now. And what date.now will give you is the number of milliseconds since 1970. And then that will give us a unique value, assuming that you're not adding more than one fish per millisecond. So fishes of fish date.now is equal to that fish that got passed in. Remember that is this object right here that we passed into the add fish. Okay. And then finally, and get rid of this, how do we actually put that new updated state into state? So 3, set the new fishes object to state. And the way that we do that is we call a method that is built in. It's called this.setState. And setState, what you do is you pass it the piece of state that you wish to update, which is fishes. We want to update the list of fishes, and we want to update it to, well, we actually have another variable called fishes here. And that will take our copied old fishes plus our new fish and overwrite the existing state, which will then trigger a change in React. And if they're displayed anywhere on the page, then they will be able to show up. So this.setState, fishes, and we'll give that a save. One thing we can do here is, because if your property and your value are the same thing, in ES6, you can simply just pass fishes, and that's the exact same thing as saying fishes, because I feel like I'm saying fishes a lot. I like to just put these on one line too. All right, so let's give it a shot. We'll go back here. What I'd like to do is open up our app component. We'll open up our fishes state. You'll see that it is empty, but now if I go and add a new one, beautiful. Let's see, the fish got added right there, and we open it up, and now the data has been taken out of our form and put into state. A couple other things we want to do to clean up before we're done here. This form here should be reset. So what we'll do is we'll go back to our add fish form, and we will refresh the form. And the way that we can reference the actual form itself is either we could put a ref on it, or we could say the event.currentTarget, and let's console log what that is. The event.currentTarget should be the form itself. Good, that's the form. And we can just run event.currentTarget, and then there is a reset method that lives on all forms that will clear it out. So let's try it again. Wes, blah, 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 description, image. I'm going to add that, and then it clears out the form, but I should be able to go to my app and see that our fish state has now been updated with a unique key and all of the data that is available to it. So that is our initial look at state. Obviously, we haven't displayed any of the state yet. We haven't looked at doing multiple pieces of state. I guess one other thing I should say as well is you notice that we didn't mess with the order here. And this is sometimes a little bit confusing to React newbies where we don't have to pass the entire state. We just have to pass the piece of state which we wish to update. So I kind of wish that it wasn't called set state, but like please update this one, or not maybe one, because you can update multiple pieces. Please update these pieces of state, please. And then you pass the piece that you wish to overwrite, not the entire thing. But it's called set state, so we have to live with it. See you in the next one.